Well, what I'm going to chat to you about is what you can expect to achieve from your lunch. What you should be able to achieve through nutrition. And so much, in fact, the main part has been hidden from all of us as to what the function of our nutrition is. We are situated between heaven and earth, and so is our food. And our food is supposed to nurture us so that we are in receipt of the earthly energies and the heavenly energies. We are a mixture of those two things. This is our manifestation. And it's so important, if we are to move forward and to be in receipt of all of the universal wisdom, that we look upon our nutrition in this way. Wisdom doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. But it is so important, our responsibility at this moment in time, to prepare our vehicle, our body, to be able to do this work. It's also futile, all of this sort of antagonism, because if our human body is functioning in the way that it should, everything can succeed. So, first of all, what is it that I'm talking about? I'm talking about the combination of electrons and photons and the receipt of oxygen. So, if you like, I could say my talk is entitled How to Make Sure That All Cells in Your Body Operate Aerobically. The cells in our body are really like our own microcosm. And it's entirely up to us how we live our life, whether we allow most of the macrocosm to be represented in our microcosm. That is our responsibility, that is our choice. Because I feel that the greatest stress that any of us can undergo is not to live the life we are. Not to be who we are is the greatest stress. And any form of stress is actually physically, physiologically manifested in the body as dehydration. So the more stressed a person, the more dehydrated. And the more dehydrated the body, the more it creates stress from within. So we have stress creating dehydration, dehydration creating stress. Our brain should be 80% water, the rest of the body 70%. And you'll find these ratios equate with land to sea, those ratios on our planet. And it is the water that holds all the messages. It's only water that holds a clear message. So that's incredibly important for us to be fully hydrated. In the Eastern medicine, the water element holds the emotion fear. So anyone who is dehydrated will be fearful. And when you think of what society is doing, the more fearful or the more stressed you are by the fear-engendering messages, the more dehydrated your body becomes, the more contracted your body becomes, and then you are less able to hold the messages you require to live your life fully. This is such an important aspect that is so fully understood in the East. So here we have our microcosm, our cell. And everyone is unique. Your astrology is all unique. So things were quite different at the different moments when we were born. And so I feel if we can work with our vehicle, it's our job to bring in the maximum information from the macrocosm into our microcosm, our cells. And the barrier between the two is the cell membrane. I call it the doorman. And the cell membrane is triple. You have an inner and an outer, which holds a charge, but the central part of the cell membrane is made from fatty acids and saturated fats. And they have, it is full of little gates that open and close. And they work a little bit like computer gates. And so they're in charge of what is allowed in and what goes out. So that equating of the macrocosm and the microcosm. So the charge of the cell is all important. I'll explain. You know, we talk about the 4 macrominerals, the electrolytes, sodium and potassium, calcium and magnesium. Sodium and potassium work in opposition. Calcium and magnesium work in opposition. And it is important that during the daytime, if the cell is in health, sodium and calcium will travel into the cell, pushing potassium and magnesium out. And at night, it reverses. This is perfect. You have this first dance into the cell, out of the cell. You have the influence of the sun, you have the influence of the moon. We're regulated by these things. So if they're moving in and coming fully out, that's a perfect harmony with all of the energies. But if we are fearful and become dehydrated, our body will produce cholesterol to weave in the cell membrane. It does this because our body does not know how to work against us. And so it wishes to protect the fluid inside the cell so that we don't die from dehydration. So here is this person contracted through stress, holding fear. The cell membrane is much less porous. So immediately we're going to interfere with this day-night exchange, which should happen fully. Because our nutrition is important, the important aspect of our nutrition is that we can dance to the natural rhythms. That if we don't dance in tune to the natural rhythms, we create stress and disharmony. So if it's working perfectly, the nucleus in the middle of the cell will hold a positive charge. The inner membrane will hold a negative charge, and the outer one outside the cell will hold a positive charge. And that is very, very important for health, that the inner and outer cell membrane are very different. We call it the cell membrane potential. And for me, it's the most important thing in my understanding and the way I view things, because it is that that decides how much photon energy, light energy, you can hold in your body. Everything is controlled by light. So we have the positive charge on the outer side of each cell. And this strong positive charge attracts to itself electrons. These are negatively charged subatomic particles. Where do you think they come from? They come from Mother Earth. When we walk barefoot, we have so much electron energy going through our feet, which is why the Native American Indians still scoop a dip in the ground, fill it with damp grass, place the sick person in it to receive the maximum of photon energy. And our nutrition, it's so important that we have the biggest electron cloud around each cell that we possibly can. And humans and dolphins and whales have this in common, the ability to develop very wide electron clouds. And they know that the evolvement of a person shows in the size of the electron clouds. But only we personally can influence that. And this is where understanding true nutrition and where we stand will enable us to do it. So the first thing is removal of stress manifestation in the body to have as much hydration so that the differential between the inner and outer cell membrane can be as great as possible. So then we have the electron clouds, and of course the electrons come from our food. You know, the vibrant berry is full of electron energy. The oils, the right essential oils, if they're grown and gathered properly, are absolutely bursting with electron energy. So they gather around the edge of the cell membrane. And the function there is this photon cloud traps, this electron cloud traps the photon energy of light. So the bigger your electron cloud you develop, the more photons you can hold. And this is the light aspect around the cell. Then the function of the light is to attract the oxygen. It's so important for it to be set up this way. It's no good as just wanting to be in a more oxygenated area if this through line of the charge of the cell membrane and the electron clouds and the photons are not there. All of these things are required. So that if we move, we're all on the line somewhere of whatever you want to call it, and you notice that with the changes in the functioning of the cell, this is the thing that's influenced the ability for it to be oxygenated. The other thing is that, you know, we have been told by biochemists that the sodium and calcium goes into the cell in the day, pushing out potassium and magnesium, and at night the moon influence pulls the sodium and calcium out because they're joined at the hip, and the potassium and magnesium go back in. Well, what we know is much more exciting, that there are not enough calcium gates in the cell membrane for this all to be a movement. So we can go back, and I can speak as a homeopath, but also Steiner and his biodynamic and all of the anthroposophical understanding, what is happening is transmutation. And if you look up the formulae for transmutation, you have to have a certain amount of photons and a certain amount of oxygen present for this to take place. So how undemanding can the body be? You know, this total misunderstanding of how it should really work. And we know that there are things around us that are talking about oppression and all the rest of it that we know about, but it is known that the perfect cell, with its big electron cloud, the photons, and the oxygen attraction, that cell will produce its ATP, its energy, adenosine triphosphate, 80% from oxygen and 20% from glucose. But if we move to the other end of the scale of whatever we want to call it, it reverses so that the cell goes into energy sparing mode, because it does the best it can always for us, and then it can only access 20% oxygen, and so it requires 80% glucose. And so this is the situation where you start to see a lot of fermentation. I'm just beginning my second book, and jokingly I've said to friends, I think I want to call it We're All Going Mouldy. But that's not terribly positive. But, you know, in my 40 years of practicing, I have to say, it's not far from the truth. But this is really all about how we look after our body. It is so important. And if we have this happening perfectly, we change rhythm or influence every 2 hours. You know, in Eastern medicine, it's so beautifully understood because each emotion and each organ is going to be visited every 24 hours. And so the rhythm of the planet slightly changes every 2 hours and the upper energies. so that they are 2-hour slots that brush round the 24 hours, visiting the different organs, and each of these organs holds a different emotion. So each emotion and each organ is visited every day. And if you can be in synchronicity with the rhythm of that visit, that is so harmonious for that emotion and that organ. But as soon as we become contracted, then of course there's disharmony. Then we have the 24-hour rhythm, the day-night, the one I was talking about with the exchange of the electrolytes. And as soon as this is not complete, the whole charge of the person changes. So many things are changing at the same time. Then we have a 2-day rhythm, because the moon moves focus every 2 days or thereabouts every 2 days, and it in turn will focus an organ and an emotion. And this first became incredibly clear to me. I was with a group of people who'd asked me to give a talk in Cardiff, and quite a number of the people there had woken at 4 o'clock in the morning with a pain in their stomach. And, you know, one knew there was a reason, so we looked it up, and the new moon was situated in Virgo, influencing the stomach at 4 o'clock in the morning. The wisdom is all there. It's just we don't know, or we haven't been taught where to look. Because we haven't been taught that everything in this universe is connected. Every single thing. Then, of course, we move on from the 2-day rhythm to the lunar rhythm. You know, you hear some people saying, oh, you know, a woman with issues with menstruation, she needs some magnesium. But really, the real truth of it is the woman is not in harmony with the moon. And we know that magnesium has an impact on the electrolytes and the charge of the cell and how she will respond to the moon. I remember years ago, somebody wanted to join the course on the college late. And my son said to her, well, you know, there'll be a lot of catching up. Oh, no, you know, she was so sure of herself. That was fine, you know, just send me the CDs. And after a couple of weeks, she phoned very irately and said, I need to speak to Barbara Wren. And so I spoke to her and she ranted away to me. And so I said, you know, would you like any feedback? And I said, you know, do you live somewhere where there's no moon? Do you not have a moon in your world? Because she was furious that I should be speaking about the moon affecting how the cells work, you know. And then I did say to her, do you only ever do courses? Just to reiterate what you already know. And I think this is the thing to be open to at the moment. The amount of wisdom that is piling through, particularly since the 11-11-11, the last portal, is amazing. But I would just say to people, please don't shove it in your old pigeonholes. We are really working with new paradigms now. It's so important not to make sense of it immediately with your old way of looking at things. We know transmutation takes place. We know the human body can operate differently. And the way that we actually communicate is by light. Empathy and the communication is by this exchange. And it's measurable. People in a harmonious, empathetic situation, the biophoton emission from those people goes up enormously. And so this is why it's so important that we take it as a responsibility, because, you know, if people are working in harmony with the rhythms and maximizing the amount of light, they will be in contact with the maximum amount of universal wisdom. And by jingo, we need it. But it emanates. It doesn't have to be said. It emanates. So, what are the requirements to work in this way? The first thing is to look at our levels of hydration. You know, the biggest thing in our society today is to carry as little fear as it's possible to carry. it is a totally fear-ridden society. But remember, that doesn't just go in at brain level. That actually has an impact on how your body functions. It's the first thing to look at, how much a person is on dehydration alert, because if the cell is so coated, then we know that things are not functioning properly. We're interfering with that 80-20. The colon is the organ that registers whether you're hydrated or not. In the East, it's known that short grain brown rice is the most harmonizing food for the colon. Why? Because it's 80-20. It's 80% water, 20% solids. It matches brain hydration, it matches planet hydration. We're looking to have things synchronistically lined up, not in opposition. So just look at your fluids. And fluids held within neutral foods have a very good impact. I know there are many issues often now with grains because of the fermentation. When I started practicing 40 years ago, maybe if you wanted to remove stress and challenge in someone's diet, initially to help hydration, then perhaps we would suggest a time with no wheat. It very quickly became a time of no gluten, and now with many, many people, it's no grains for a period of time because the challenging of the fermentation that is going on. So things are changing quite dramatically and very, very quickly, and each person needs to be assessed. So your hydration is the most important thing. How many diuretics do you drink in a day? You know, all the caffeinated drinks, the sweet drinks, alcohol, chocolatey drinks, all of those have a very dehydrating effect, not hydrating. So you want to hold that balance. And incidentally, the rhythm of the colon matches the rhythm of sleep. So anybody who has sleep issues, look for colon, what is going on there. Very, very important. And then we need to look at pH, because those electrolytes are going to, by their position and the position of water, etc., is going to decide the pH of your body. You know, how well can your body produce hydrogen ions to alkalize acidic things. And we are alkaline beings. Our blood must always be maintained slightly alkaline, above the 7. But all of our metabolic processes produce acidity. So it's hard work. You know, at the end of each 24 hours, we should have definitely woken into that alkaline state. And so the question, how do you feel on waking? Do you feel refreshed? Is usually one of the most giveaway questions that you can pose for people. How fresh and abundant for the day do you feel on waking? Because the nighttime should always take you back to that alkaline situation. And that, because everything is connected, means you have the potential for a large electron cloud, photons, and oxygen utilization by the cell. So be choosy about the sort of foods you're eating. Balance it correctly. You know, if you've been under stress, you do need more alkalizing foods. And several people, Rosie Daniels was one of them, looking to see this whole aspect of acid-alkali with food, because in the past we were always taught that if it's acidic outside, like a lemon, then it would have an alkalizing effect with the ashing on the inside. But now, of course, people are realizing that it will only be alkalized if your body can produce enough hydrogen ions to do that. And if you're very acidic, it's not. It just simply can't do it. So you're far better moving towards the neutral pH and the alkaline foods to make it easier for your body. Also, to have a look at the pH of the water. I'm not suggesting people go drinking hugely alkaline things, because if you do, you create elimination, which we can touch on. So think of, you know, eating much more locally, because, for example, the effect for example, of someone having a chicken and feeding the chicken themselves near their home, collecting the egg and eating that egg. The difference between that and someone going to the supermarket and grabbing an egg, which has no relationship whatsoever. And so, absolutely nothing to do with religion. It is a very sensible thing to bless your food, because if you present the energy from your palms to your food, it will come into resonance. And you're looking all the time to be in resonance, not in opposition, no matter whatever it is. And it's been tested with water that it reduces the surface tension if you bless it. Also, there are measurable amounts of hydrogen peroxide in it, so the oxygen availability goes up. So this is mixing your energy with what you're going, bringing it in harmony to you. So the closer to you it's grown, if you're lucky enough to have it biodynamically grown, so it's grown within the universal rhythms as well as the earthly rhythms, this food is so different, it creates no challenge. When you think of fast food and the rubbish that people eat, it's offering an enormous stress to the body, so the only thing it can do is move into dehydration alert. This is just talking even in food, not of thoughts, lifestyle, and the sort of society at the moment that is undergoing change that we're in. So have a think of hydration, have a think of pH. The other thing that is changing within us is body temperature. Certainly way back when I was nursing, it was considered to be 98.4. Now it's considered to be 97.4. Nobody says why, but why have we gone colder? But of course, the more closed off the cells become, and the more we're persecuted for talking about iodine, the endocrine system and the thyroid in particular. It's an epidemic out there. And I really wouldn't want people to think that iodine just belongs to the thyroid. The first most important place for iodine is the brain. And if you look at the work of people like Michel Audin, the amazing obstetrician, training doulas now in his 80s, he is so concerned about Western women's deficiency in iodine, DHA, from the broken down omega-3, and vitamin D3, because he knows without those three, brain development will not happen. But from my perspective, even more importantly, you cannot have a functioning blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier mechanism is the protection of your brain from any toxic substances that you may come up against. And so, you've only got to think of the sort of things that go on. There is no blood-brain barrier in situ until 6 months of age. Just think what happens before 6 months of age. So that if it's not functioning, those toxic materials will go straight through to the brain. So we're, thinking of all the mental illnesses that are existing. And interestingly enough, the blood-brain barrier has a strong relationship with the small intestine, which in the East is known as the great separator of the pure from the impure. And so you find when you're working with people that you're looking very early on at the condition of the small intestine, which really gives you a lead to what is happening at brain level. So body temperature, very important. We shouldn't be getting colder. We can only be getting colder if cell membranes are becoming coated and we're not really in receipt of everything we should. And every single cell has an iodine receptor. And I haven't yet met anyone trained in medicine other than Steve who knows about the sodium iodine symporter. It is just as important as the sodium-potassium exchange, that fundamental electrolyte exchange. And, I'm sure you'll be interested to go and look up the work of people who've worked with iodine and worked with many other things where they're explaining this. For example, David Brownstein is one person whom I quote in my book, referencing his work. You know, fertility, central nervous system functioning, you know, it is so affected at the moment. You know, when you're looking at preconceptual care, you're looking at what is happening in teens, and all of the sort of mental health things that are ensuing. You know, we are just not giving people ingredients for their brain. It's as simple as that. You know, the healthiest people are a group of Japanese people who live on mountainous islands, so they have to be coastal dwellers. So their intake of iodine each day by living by the sea and from the sea is very high indeed. But we're not supposed to talk about how much iodine we need, but do have a good read because it is such an important missing link. And it explains so much of why the body temperature has gone down. Interestingly enough, the lowest body temperatures I've ever come across have been people who have been produced by IVF. So kind of working differently, some real attention ought to be given to the thyroid and the iodine status going on there. Quite remarkably low temperatures some people are working with. So it's another thing that people can look at. And so obviously there have always been old-fashioned techniques for helping to bring body temperature up to normal. The other thing, of course, that is incredibly important is the amount of light that your body can hold. This controls everything. You know, why has there been such an outbreak of passion about vitamin D3? I truly, personally believe within this decade, they're going to have to hold their hands up and say light does control everything. You know, over my many years of practice, I couldn't help but see the things I've seen, you know, and people who needed oils for things like MS, if they go off to India, don't need oil. Why is that? Well, oil and light are pretty interchangeable. You know how they always anointed with light, the crown chakra, to bring the light in. And nature, as always, has the answers. You know, one day it occurred to me, because I talk about in dis-ease that when the cell membrane is coated and therefore not allowing the electron, photon, oxygen interplay taking place, in that cell becomes colder and darker. And the reason it becomes darker is if you imagine the full spectrum of light moving through an open space, the full spectrum arrives at the other side. But if it is affected by hitting a very affected cell membrane with the cholesterol entwined, only part of the spectrum will come out. So you may have the full spectrum of message one side of the cell, but coming up it's going to get thwarted. So the whole aspect of communication in the body is via colour with light, moving from one cell to another. And so this is why, you know, we carry that responsibility to look at that. Because after we've looked at how much light the body can hold, it tells us about the oxygen. Because, as I say, it's not going to be possible for the cell to use it unless you have the nucleus, the right charge, the inner and outer cell membrane, the correct charge, the electron cloud as big as you can get it, so that you can receive the maximum amount of photon energy. So let's place this information. You know, it's just amazing, I feel. I'd love to know the astrology of today, this particular day, having had the week we've had and all ending up here for our chat and our lunch, that we, of course, are moving into so much photon energy. We're there. You know, they can do all sorts of other things. But in 1987, in August 1987, our galaxy started to move into the photon belt. Our galaxy moves around a greater sun called Alcyone. And it moves around Alcyone in a very elliptical way. Really elliptical. So you've got two periods of time that are very close in to Alcyone, the greater sun. And you've got two periods of time that are a long way away. And if you chop up this circle, this elliptical circle, into 12, it has then the names of the zodiac, which is like a calendar. And you find that 10 phases are in what we call galactic night. It's just over 26,000 years moving round. So the 10, in fact all 12, are just over 2,000 years in each of the 12 signs. So you have 10 periods of just over 2,000 years that are in what we call galactic night, and only 2 periods that are in the photon belt. And that's where we are now. So we're close into Alcyone. The last time we were close in was the age of Leo, when all of the stories about Atlantis took place. It was exactly that timing. And of course, Steiner has a lot to say about those times. So it's all there. We're here, I feel, in a huge rectification, redress period. You know, the universe is so amazing. Man may think he's strong, but it's a farce. The universal energies are all powerful. And here we are in this gift, in this photon belt, started in August 1987, fully in by 21st of December this year. And so we have the potential to be in receipt of the most enormous amount of photon energy and therefore universal wisdom. But it's our choice, it really is, to be in receipt of that by how we prepare the vehicle. So I don't think anybody in this room is going to be surprised about the suppression of nutrition, the suppression of real information about growing, preparing, everything to do with how we should nurture ourselves to take that rightful position between heaven and earth, the electron and photon energy, which is life itself, is that whole expression. So very important time for us to change everything from within. We don't have to look outside. It can all happen. We only own ourselves. We have our children for 7 years by proxy and influence there. But we only own ourselves. It's the only thing we have the right to change. And if we do that, we can bring about such dramatic individual and collective change. I'd like now just to share with you my current passion, which I hope you put it in the context of a chat. I'm sure many of you will be aware that there are 2 ways of looking at dis-ease. We have Pasteur and we have Béchamp. And you know that we adopted Pasteur. And his view, until he was on his deathbed when he revoked it, said all disease comes from outside. It's bad luck, guys. It's nothing to do with you. You happen to be in the wrong place. And Béchamp, on the other hand, said, no, it is the soil within. And he knew that the beginning, the form, smaller than the cell, much more important than the cell, is the microzyma. And I've been studying the work of Dr. Lawrence Broxmeyer, whose work you can look up, and Gaston Nissen and Reif very much, because I have quite a lot of students here today, past students, which is absolutely delightful. And they know I'm always banging on about the tubercular taint. As a homeopath, we would call it the tubercular miasm. And we've thought about it as this energetic blueprint that we carry in the energy of our being. But Béchamp and other people know that this microzyma is constantly changing form. And it can take up 16 different forms. Its ultimate form is mycelial. And it can come back again. So it can move backwards and forwards from microzyma, and always goes back to microzyma in the earth ultimately. It's all there in the understanding with Steiner, with the biodynamic growing agriculture. So here we have 16 different forms, if you wish, I mean, you know, these forms within the body, starting from the microzyma, the beginning of life. And in studying Broxmire's work, I must say I studied it very carefully because, again, everything is by observation over 40 years. I found that I could write without meeting the person, not that I did, but I could write for you the case history of somebody who had been diagnosed HIV positive. And I knew there was always this very strong tubercular miasmic taint picture. So in looking at Reif's work, and currently Lawrence Broxmire, it seemed obvious to me that this miasm creates a predisposition. And the first article that really made me sit up and look by Broxmire was that he realized that the flu in the last century could never ever create a pandemic. It could produce an epidemic, but it was totally, utterly impossible for flu to create a pandemic. And so he researched the cause of death of these people in the flu pandemic. And lo and behold, the majority actually died from TB. And so he looked to see where the largest percentage of population died. There was no surprises there, it was Southern Ireland. And so, you know, from my background of homeopathy, it became very evident to me that these, when we pick up the taint or miasmic picture, it is manifested in these 16 different changing forms of the microzyma. So what happened with the flu with these people was that they would have been carrying the tubercular miasm, and the flu triggered it off. Now, his work is looking at all manner of illnesses, is looking at this predisposition. And so this is the other thing. It's worth always us looking at our predispositions and working with them to remove them, particularly preconceptually, you know, before we have children. But it's his work really lit up for me the physical manifestation of predispositions. And so, being the great thinker he is always for working with the predispositional expression of the microzyma. And he's talking a lot about mycobacterium in different diseases. So it's, you know, he still has managed to stay inside the medical profession, working in research in New York. So, you know, what we're saying is everything can change. Everything is connected. And of course, the way we live our lives, the way we nurture ourselves, will have a huge, huge impact upon how we influence these changes. And now we can, you know, not just energetically assess, you know, what is going on. And recently, I say recently, it was last October, I was in Bulgaria for the launch of my book, and I started to look around and see how much TB had been in the background there. And I happened to mention to my host how very much psoriasis there was in Ireland and how connected it was with the tubercular taint. And she knew she had a cousin with psoriasis, and so she immediately phoned the aunt to find out who'd had TB, and his father had. So, you know, you've got all of these connections. So the mysteries that we're fascinated by in our chats today, you know, has a lot of story that goes behind it. Very important to be understanding our predispositions. You know, how, you know, all of these things we could say are just, they're our growth point. They may be our weaknesses, but they're also our growth point. Yeah. So I don't know whether people want to ask any questions. Barbara, yes. I just look at ephemeris. South conjunct Uranus, 4-degree Aries today. Thank you, Aishigal. Yeah, have you told Steve? His Uranus is pretty potent in his chart. Oh, wow. It really has kicked off since then. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. 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 Amazing. Yeah. So, you know, these are the greater influences that we're all under. Yeah. And that's why we should prepare our vehicle to dance with them, not be in opposition. You know, we should dance with them. And dis-ease simply means we're not dancing to the tunes. We're not picking up the messages. So, you know, I really feel if we all worked on our vehicle to maximize that photon energy, there'd be no stopping peace. There certainly wouldn't. You know, light gets into the dark doesn't get in the light. Yeah. Yes?
If you have a taste,
if you have what?
If you do have a TB taste, is it curable and how do you...
Well, it's very interesting. I've got to be very careful what I say here. On our chat, but been an incredible amount of diagnosis of something due to calcification. Yeah. Now, the thumbnail sketch of TB is the inability to keep calcium in the right place. And if you can't keep calcium in the right place, it is because you're not able to use your magnesium properly. And even organic food is likely to be short of magnesium unless you sprinkle Epsom salts on the ground before you plant. Yeah? So, yes, it's treatable. And this is what you look at in the preconceptual care. It's very interesting when you're looking at the whole tubercular thing, because in the East, the metal element is colon, skin, lungs, mind. So if you have someone in perfect health and they're overstressed by whatever we might want to label it, then they will have a colon imbalance. If they continue to be stressed, it will manifest on the skin. If you continue, and all this time with this stress, they're becoming more dehydrated, it will manifest at lung level, the intake of chi, the seat of depression. If you challenge and stress it even longer than that, it will manifest at brain level. And so this is what we're seeing in the metal element, because the colon is not holding that hydration story. So yes, you know, the misplacement of calcium, a lot of the old Irish novels were talking about them taking the limestone off the wall to eat when they were so ill with TB. So misplacement of calcium is the same as misplacement of sodium, and that begins the story. It's as soon as this day-night exchange is slightly impaired, the body is manifesting your dis-ease in that you're not in harmony with the universal and earthly energies. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and from what you think of, for example, the Jain monks who lead very energetic lives on a minimum of food or none at all, have this practice of sun gazing, inward gazing.
Yes. Yeah. The light, the photons, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's so much work, isn't there, you know, in just playing music to grains when these things are division. It's all a vibration, isn't it? And this is what they don't want us to look at, that everything is a vibration and very subtle.
Barbara Wren, thank you very much.